The desert sun beat down mercilessly as Staff Sergeant Marcus Rodriguez packed his final belongings into his duffel bag. After 18 months deployed in Afghanistan, he was finally going home. His hands moved with practiced efficiency, folding his uniforms and securing his personal items, but his mind was already thousands of miles away in the small town of Cedar Falls. Texas Marcus had joined the Marines straight out of high school, driven by a sense of duty and a desire to serve his country. Now at 28, he was a seasoned veteran with 3 deployments under his belt. But this last tour had been different. The missions were more dangerous, the nights longer, and the weight of responsibility heavier than ever before. What kept him going through the darkest moments was the thought of home. More specifically, the thought of his 2 German shepherds, Rex and Luna, who had been his constant companions before deployment. His neighbor, Mrs. Henderson, had promised to look after them while he was away. She was a kind elderly woman who lived alone and had grown fond of the dogs during Marcus's previous deployments. Rex was the older of the 2, a magnificent black and tan German shepherd with intelligent amber eyes and an unwavering loyalty that had earned him the nickname Shadow among Marcus's friends. The dog had been with Marcus for 5 years, a gift to himself after his first deployment. Rex seemed to understand Marcus in ways that even humans couldn't, sensing his moods and providing comfort during difficult times. Luna was younger, a beautiful silver and black German shepherd with piercing blue eyes. Marcus had rescued her from a shelter 2 years ago when she was just a puppy. She had been abandoned and traumatized, but Marcus's patience and love had transformed her into a confident, playful companion. The bond between the 3 of them was unbreakable. During his deployment, Marcus had video called Mrs. Henderson every week to check on his dogs. The calls always lifted his spirits, seeing Rex and Luna bounding around her backyard or sleeping peacefully on her porch. Mrs. Henderson would update him on their health, their eating habits, and their little quirks that made him smile even in the harsh reality of war. "They miss you terribly," she would always say, her voice warm with affection. "Rex sits by the window every evening watching for your truck, and Luna has claimed your old pillow as her own. They're good dogs, Marcus. They're waiting for you." Those words had sustained him through firefights, long patrols, and sleepless nights. The promise of reunion with his beloved dogs gave him strength when everything else seemed uncertain. He had even carried a photo of Rex and Luna in his helmet, a reminder of what he was fighting to return to. The flight home seemed endless. Marcus sat in his dress blues, staring out the airplane window as the landscape below changed from foreign deserts to familiar American farmland. His fellow Marines chatted excitedly about their homecoming plans, but Marcus remained quiet, lost in thoughts of the warm welcome he expected from Rex and Luna. He imagined their reaction when they saw him. Rex would probably bark once in recognition, then bound toward him with that dignified excitement that was uniquely his. Luna would likely go crazy with joy, spinning in circles and jumping up to lick his face. The thought made him smile for the first time in weeks. When the plane finally touched down at San Antonio International Airport, Marcus felt a mix of relief and anticipation coursing through his veins. He had been away from American soil for so long that even the humid Texas air felt like a gift. After processing through the arrival procedures and gathering his belongings, he made his way to the rental car desk. The drive to Cedar Falls took 3 hours, but Marcus didn't mind. The familiar landscape of rolling hills, mesquite trees, and endless sky felt like a healing balm to his war-weary soul. He rolled down the windows and let the warm Texas breeze wash over him, carrying scents of wildflowers and fresh grass that were so different from the dust and smoke he had grown accustomed to. As he drove through his hometown, Marcus noticed how little had changed. The same mom-and-pop restaurants lined Main Street, the same weathered barn stood in Johnson's Field, and the same water tower displayed the faded Cedar Falls High School Wildcats logo. It was exactly what he needed, proof that some things remained constant in a world that often felt chaotic and unpredictable. His house sat at the end of a quiet street, surrounded by mature oak trees that provided blessed shade from the afternoon sun. It was a modest 2-bedroom home with a large backyard, perfect for 2 active German shepherds. Marcus had bought it with his military savings, dreaming of the day when he would settle down and start a family. For now, Rex and Luna were his family. As he pulled into his driveway, Marcus expected to see the dogs rushing to greet him. their tails wagging furiously and their excited barks echoing through the neighborhood. Mrs. Henderson had said she would bring them over as soon as he arrived home. But the yard was empty, and an unusual silence hung in the air. Marcus grabbed his bags and walked to the front door, fishing his keys from his pocket. Maybe Mrs. Henderson was running late, or perhaps the dogs were taking an afternoon nap. He unlocked the door and stepped inside, calling out their names. "Rex! Luna, I'm home, guys." The house was quiet. Too quiet. Marcus set down his bags and walked through the rooms, expecting to find his dogs sleeping in their favorite spots. But they were nowhere to be seen. A growing sense of unease settled in his stomach as he checked every room, calling their names with increasing urgency. Maybe they were still at Mrs. Henderson's house. He pulled out his phone and dialed her number, but it went straight to voicemail. Concerned now, Marcus decided to walk over to her house, which was just 3 blocks away. The afternoon heat was intense, but he barely noticed it as worry consumed his thoughts. Mrs. Henderson's house looked different somehow. The cheerful flower garden she maintained so meticulously appeared overgrown and neglected. Her mailbox was overflowing with letters and packages, and several newspapers lay yellowing on her front porch. Marcus knocked on the door repeatedly, but there was no answer. Panic began to creep into his chest as he walked around to the backyard, hoping to find his dogs playing in Mrs. Henderson's garden. But the yard was empty except for 2 metal bowls sitting by the back door. Bowls that looked suspiciously like the ones he had bought for Rex and Luna. His heart pounding, Marcus rushed back to his own house, his mind racing with possibilities. Where were his dogs? What had happened to Mrs. Henderson? Why did her house look abandoned? The joy of homecoming was rapidly being replaced by a dread he couldn't shake. As he approached his front yard, something caught his eye that made his blood run cold. There, huddled together under the large oak tree in his front yard, were 2 familiar shapes. Rex and Luna sat pressed against each other, their bodies trembling despite the heat, their eyes wide with what could only be described as terror. Marcus dropped his keys and ran toward his dogs, his heart breaking at the sight of them. Rex and Luna, normally confident and strong, were cowering together like frightened puppies. Their beautiful coats were matted and dirty, and he could see their ribs showing through their fur. It was clear they had been outside for days, possibly weeks. "Rex, Luna," Marcus called softly, not wanting to startle them further, but instead of the joyful reunion he had dreamed about. Both dogs flinched at the sound of his voice. Rex, who had never shown fear of anything in his life, actually backed away slightly, his ears pinned flat against his head. Marcus slowly approached them, his military training kicking in as he assessed the situation. These were not just scared dogs, and they were traumatized. Something terrible had happened, and whatever it was had shaken them to their core. Luna was shaking so violently that Marcus could see it from several feet away, and Rex kept glancing nervously toward the house as if expecting some unseen threat to emerge. Kneeling down about 10 feet away from them, Marcus extended his hand and spoke in the gentle tone he had always used with his dogs. "Hey guys, it's me. It's Marcus. I'm home now. Everything's going to be okay." Rex's ears perked up slightly at the familiar voice, and for a moment recognition flickered in his amber eyes. But instead of approaching, he whimpered softly and pressed closer to Luna. It was heartbreaking to see the once proud dog reduced to such a state of fear. Marcus noticed that both dogs kept looking toward the house with obvious terror in their eyes. Whatever had happened, it was connected to his home. But from the outside, everything looked normal. The windows were intact, the door was locked, and there were no obvious signs of damage or intrusion. Deciding that gaining his dog's trust was the priority, Marcus sat down on the grass and waited. He had learned patience during his military service, and he applied that same patience now. Slowly, he began talking to Rex and Luna, telling them about his deployment, about how much he had missed them, about the long journey home. After nearly an hour, Rex finally took a tentative step toward him. The dog's movement was careful and cautious, nothing like the confident stride Marcus remembered. Luna followed close behind, her blue eyes darting between Marcus and the house as if she couldn't decide which was more threatening. When Rex was finally close enough to touch, Marcus very slowly reached out and placed his hand on the dog's head. Rex flinched at first, then seemed to remember the familiar touch. Gradually, some of the tension left his body, and he allowed Marcus to pet him gently. Luna was more hesitant, but eventually, she too approached close enough for Marcus to touch. As he stroked both dogs, he could feel how thin they had become. Their water and food bowls were nowhere to be seen, and it was obvious they had been surviving on whatever they could find. "Where have you been eating?" Marcus whispered, examining their mouths and paws for clues. He found traces of mud and what looked like garbage around Luna's muzzle, suggesting they had been scavenging from trash cans and drinking from puddles. The realization hit him like a physical blow. His dogs had been abandoned and left to fend for themselves. But by whom? And why were they so terrified of the house? Mrs. Henderson would never have abandoned them like this. Something had happened to her, and whatever it was had left his dogs traumatized and homeless. As the sun began to set, Marcus knew he needed to get Rex and Luna inside, fed, and comfortable. But every time he moved toward the house, both dogs planted their feet and refused to follow. Luna actually whimpered and tried to pull away when he gently tugged on her collar. "Okay, guys," Marcus said softly. "We don't have to go inside right now. Let me figure out what's going on first." He walked to his truck and retrieved a bottle of water and some protein bars from his travel supplies. The dogs drank eagerly, confirming his suspicion that they had been dehydrated. They were more hesitant about the food, sniffing it carefully before taking small, cautious bites. While Rex and Luna ate, Marcus walked around his property, looking for clues about what might have happened. The yard showed signs of the dogs' prolonged presence, areas where they had dug shallow depressions to sleep, patches of grass they had eaten in desperation, and evidence that they had been using the space as a bathroom for quite some time. But it was when he walked around to the back of the house that Marcus found the first real clue. The sliding glass door that led to his kitchen was slightly ajar, something he definitely would not have left that way when he deployed. More concerning was the smell that drifted out through the opening. It was a smell Marcus recognized from his military service, a smell that made his stomach clench with dread. It was the unmistakable odor of death, sweet and cloying and impossible to ignore once detected. Something had died inside his house, and from the strength of the smell, it had been dead for quite some time. Marcus's mind raced as he considered the possibilities. Had Mrs. Henderson had a medical emergency while visiting his house? Had someone broken in and been killed? The scenarios that ran through his head were all horrible, but they would explain why his dogs were so traumatized and why they refused to go near the house. He pulled out his phone to call the police, but hesitated. What if Mrs. Henderson was inside? And what if she was still alive but hurt? Every instinct told him to go inside and check, but his dog's terror gave him pause. They were trying to warn him about something, and he had learned to trust their instincts. Instead of entering the house, Marcus decided to call Mrs. Henderson's daughter, who lived in the next town over. He had met her a few times and had her number in case of emergencies. The phone rang several times before a woman's voice answered. "Hello? Hi, Sarah. This is Marcus Rodriguez, Mrs. Henderson's neighbor. I just got back from deployment and I can't find your mother or my dogs. I'm really worried." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Marcus, oh, thank God you're home. I've been trying to reach you for weeks, but the military said you were in a remote location. What happened? Where's your mother?" Sarah's voice broke as she spoke. "Mom's been in the hospital for over a month. She had a massive stroke while she was at your house taking care of your dogs. The paramedics found her unconscious in your kitchen." Marcus felt the world spin around him. "Is she okay?" "She's alive, but she's in a coma. The doctors don't know if she'll wake up." Sarah paused and Marcus could hear her crying. "Marcus, I'm so sorry. In all the chaos at the hospital, I forgot about your dogs. I should have made arrangements for them, but I was so scared about Mom and I didn't know when you were coming back. The pieces were starting to fall into place, but something still didn't make sense. Sarah, my dogs are here, but they're terrified of the house." "What exactly happened when the paramedics came?" "I don't know all the details," Sarah said. "The paramedics said they found Mom on your kitchen floor. She had been there for at least a day before the neighbors heard your dogs barking and called for a welfare check. By the time they got inside..." She trailed off and Marcus felt his stomach drop. "What aren't you telling me, Sarah? Marcus, you need to call the police before you go inside your house. There's something else, something the paramedics mentioned that I didn't understand at the time." Marcus gripped his phone tighter, his knuckles turning white. "Sarah, what did the paramedics say?" "I need to know everything. They said there was blood, Marcus. A lot of blood. More than what they would expect from someone who just collapsed from a stroke." Sarah's voice was barely above a whisper. They thought maybe Mom had fallen and hit her head, but the blood pattern was strange. It was everywhere, on the walls, the floor, even the ceiling. A chill ran down Marcus's spine despite the warm evening air. Did they investigate further? The police came, but they said it was probably just from Mom falling and hitting something sharp. With her medical emergency, they didn't spend much time on it. They were more focused on getting her to the hospital. Sarah paused. Marcus, I should have pushed them to look harder. I should have made sure your house was properly secured. I'm so sorry. After hanging up with Sarah, Marcus sat on his front steps, trying to process what he had learned. Mrs. Henderson had suffered a stroke in his kitchen and had been bleeding heavily when the paramedics found her. But that didn't explain why Rex and Luna were so terrified of the house. Dogs didn't typically react this way to the scene of a medical emergency, especially not dogs who knew and loved the person involved. He looked over at Rex and Luna, who were still huddled together under the oak tree, watching him with anxious eyes. In the fading light, he could see that their fear hadn't diminished at all. If anything, as darkness approached, they seemed to become more agitated. Marcus made a decision. He would call the police and ask them to do a welfare check on his house before he entered. Something was wrong, and his dog's behavior was proof enough that the situation was more serious than anyone had initially realized. When the police arrived 20 minutes later, Marcus was surprised to see that one of the officers was Tom Bradley, a guy he had gone to high school with. Tom had become a police officer while Marcus was serving his first deployment, and they had kept in touch sporadically over the years. Marcus, welcome home, brother, Tom said, approaching with a warm smile that quickly faded when he saw Marcus's expression. Sarah Henderson called the station after you two talked. She's really worried about what you might find in there. Tom, my dogs are terrified of the house. They won't go anywhere near it, and they're usually fearless. Something's not right. Tom nodded, his expression becoming more serious. I wasn't on duty the night they found Mrs. Henderson, but I heard about it from the other officers. They said it was pretty messy. He looked toward the house. You said you smell something? Death, Marcus said simply. I know that smell, Tom. Someone or something died in there. The two officers who had arrived with Tom were already putting on gloves and preparing their flashlights. Tom turned to Marcus. We're going to check it out. You stay here with your dogs. If there's anything dangerous in there, we'll handle it. Marcus wanted to argue, wanted to enter his own home and face whatever was waiting inside. But Rex and Luna needed him, and his military training had taught him the value of letting professionals do their jobs. He watched as the three officers approached his front door. Tom used the key Marcus had given him and slowly opened the door. Even from where Marcus sat, he could see the officers recoil slightly from the smell that escaped. They entered the house with their flashlights drawn, and Marcus could see the beams of light moving from room to room through his windows. After what felt like an eternity but was probably only 10 minutes, Tom emerged from the house. His face was pale and he was talking rapidly into his radio. Marcus couldn't make out the words, but he could tell by Tom's expression and body language that whatever they had found was serious. Marcus, Tom called out, motioning for him to stay where he was. I need you to keep your distance for now. We're calling in the crime scene team. Crime scene team? Marcus felt his blood run cold. Tom, what did you find? Tom approached slowly, his expression grim. There's definitely a body in there. But it's not Mrs. Henderson. She's alive in the hospital, remember? This is someone else and Marcus. They've been dead for a long time. The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. A stranger had died in his house while he was deployed, and somehow this death was connected to Mrs. Henderson's stroke and his dog's terror. Nothing made sense. Who is it? Marcus asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted to know the answer. We can't tell yet. The body is, well, it's been there for weeks, maybe a month. We're going to need dental records or DNA to make an identification. Tom looked back at the house, then at Rex and Luna. Your dogs probably found the body. That would explain their behavior. More police cars began arriving, followed by an ambulance and a van from the county coroner's office. Marcus's quiet neighborhood was suddenly filled with flashing lights and officials in uniform. Neighbors began emerging from their houses, drawn by the commotion. As the evening progressed, Marcus learned more details that only deepened the mystery. The body had been found in his basement, in a room he used for storage. It was the body of a man, probably in his 40s, who had been dead for at least 3 to 4 weeks. There were signs of trauma, but the exact cause of death would have to be determined by the medical examiner. Even more disturbing was the evidence that someone had been living in Marcus's house for an extended period. The officers found personal belongings that didn't belong to Marcus, evidence of meals being cooked, and signs that someone had been sleeping in his bed. Whoever it was had been there for weeks, possibly the entire time Marcus was deployed. "It looks like someone broke in while you were gone and decided to make themselves at home," Tom explained as they watched the crime scene team work. "Mrs. Henderson probably surprised them when she came to check on your dogs. The intruder might have attacked her, causing her stroke from the trauma and stress. But that still didn't explain everything. If Mrs. Henderson had discovered an intruder, why hadn't she called the police? And if the intruder had attacked her, how had he ended up dead in the basement?" The timeline was confusing and there were too many unanswered questions. As the night wore on, Marcus sat with Rex and Luna in the back of Tom's police car, trying to comfort them while watching strangers process his home as a crime scene. The dogs had finally stopped shaking, but they remained alert and nervous, their eyes never leaving the house. A detective arrived around midnight to interview Marcus. Detective Lisa Martinez was a small woman with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense attitude. She asked detailed questions about Marcus's deployment, his relationship with Mrs. Henderson, and whether he had any enemies who might want to harm him. "Sergeant Rodriguez, is there anyone who might have had access to your house while you were deployed?" "Anyone besides Mrs. Henderson?" Marcus thought carefully. "I gave Mrs. Henderson a key and she's the only one who should have had access. I don't have any family in the area, and most of my friends are either deployed or living in other states." "What about ex-girlfriends? Former roommates? Anyone who might have felt they had a right to be in your house?" "No one like that. I've been pretty focused on my military career. No serious relationships recently." Marcus paused. "Detective, who do you think this person is? How did they get into my house?" Detective Martinez closed her notebook and looked at him seriously. "We're going to find out, Sergeant. But I need you to think hard about the months before your deployment. Any strange phone calls, anyone following you, anything that seemed off. Sometimes people target military families specifically because they know the service member will be away for extended periods. The thought that someone had deliberately targeted him because of his military service made Marcus's stomach turn. Had someone been watching him, waiting for him to deploy so they could take over his house? And what had happened to turn the intruder from predator to victim? As dawn broke over Cedar Falls, Marcus found himself homeless, with 2 traumatized dogs and a house that was now a crime scene. The joyful homecoming he had dreamed about for months had turned into a nightmare, and he was beginning to realize that the worst might still be ahead of him. The morning sun cast long shadows across Marcus's front yard as the crime scene team continued their work. Marcus sat in his truck with Rex and Luna, who had finally fallen into an exhausted sleep against his sides. He hadn't slept at all, his mind racing with questions and possibilities that grew more disturbing with each passing hour. Detective Martinez approached the truck, her expression tired but determined. "Sergeant Rodriguez, we need to talk. We've found some things that might help us understand what happened here." Marcus carefully moved away from his sleeping dogs and stepped out of the truck. "What did you find?" "First, we identified the victim. His name was David Kruger, 43 years old, from Dallas. He had a criminal record, mostly breaking and entering, some drug charges, nothing violent until recently." Martinez pulled out her notebook. 6 months ago, he was arrested for stalking a military wife while her husband was deployed in Iraq. He served 3 months and was released just 2 weeks before your deployment began. The words hit Marcus like ice water. "You think he targeted me specifically?" "It's looking that way. We found journals in your bedroom, Sergeant. This man had been watching you for months before you deployed. He knew your schedule, your habits, even your deployment date. He had photos of you, your dogs, and Mrs. Henderson." Marcus felt sick. "What kind of photos?" "Pictures taken from outside your house. Some were taken through your windows. He had been studying your life, learning your routines. The journals show he was planning to move in as soon as you left for Afghanistan." Detective Martinez led Marcus to a table the crime scene team had set up, where several evidence bags contained items that made his skin crawl. Photos of him working in his yard, walking Rex and Luna, talking to Mrs. Henderson over the fence. There were detailed notes about what time he left for work, when he exercised, when Mrs. Henderson usually visited to check on the dogs. "This is insane," Marcus whispered, picking up one of the evidence bags. How long was he watching me? Based on the dates in the journals, at least 6 months. Maybe longer. Martinez pointed to another evidence bag containing what looked like house keys. We think he made copies of your keys somehow. Maybe he broke in while you were at work and made impressions, or he could have stolen them temporarily and had copies made. The violation Marcus felt was almost overwhelming. This stranger had been watching him, studying him like a specimen, planning to invade his most private space. What about Mrs. Henderson? What happened to her? We're still piecing that together, but here's what we think happened. Martinez pulled out a timeline she had constructed. Kruger moved into your house the day after you deployed. He had been living there for about 3 weeks when Mrs. Henderson came by for one of her regular checks on your dogs. She would have had her own key, Marcus said, understanding where this was going. Exactly. She let herself in, probably calling for the dogs like she always did. Kruger was caught off guard. Maybe he was sleeping, or maybe he thought he had more time before her next visit. Martinez paused. The blood evidence suggests there was a struggle in your kitchen. We found Kruger's DNA mixed with Mrs. Henderson's blood on several surfaces. Marcus closed his eyes, trying not to imagine the terror Mrs. Henderson must have felt when she realized a stranger was in the house. Did he attack her? It looks like he grabbed her, probably trying to keep her quiet. But Mrs. Henderson was tougher than he expected. We found defensive wounds on Kruger's arms and evidence that she fought back hard. The stress and trauma of the attack likely triggered her stroke. But how did Kruger end up dead in my basement? Detective Martinez looked uncomfortable. This is where it gets complicated, Sergeant. The medical examiner's preliminary findings suggest that Kruger died from blunt force trauma to the head. Someone hit him with something heavy multiple times. Marcus stared at her. You think Mrs. Henderson killed him? Before her stroke, it's possible she defended herself with enough force to cause fatal injuries. We found a bloody hammer in your basement workshop that appears to be the weapon. Mrs. Henderson's fingerprints are on it, along with Kruger's blood. The image of elderly Mrs. Henderson fighting for her life against a younger, stronger man was heartbreaking. Marcus had always known she was tough, but he had never imagined she would face something like this while trying to care for his dogs. What happened after that? We think Mrs. Henderson managed to subdue Kruger, but the trauma and exertion caused her stroke. She probably tried to call for help but collapsed in your kitchen before she could reach her phone. Your dogs found her there and stayed with her until the neighbors heard them barking frantically. Marcus looked over at Rex and Luna, still sleeping in his truck. They were trying to protect her. The neighbors said your dogs were barking nonstop for almost 24 hours before anyone realized something was wrong. When the paramedics arrived, they found Mrs. Henderson unconscious with your dogs guarding her body. The timeline was becoming clearer, but it raised new questions. If the paramedics found Mrs. Henderson in the kitchen, how did they miss Kruger's body in the basement? They were focused on saving her life. She was barely breathing and needed immediate medical attention. The basement door was closed and there was no obvious reason for them to search the rest of the house. Martinez looked back toward the house. After Mrs. Henderson was taken to the hospital, your dogs were left alone. They probably kept going back into the house, finding Kruger's body, which would explain their trauma. Marcus felt a surge of guilt and anger. His dogs had been left to deal with a nightmare situation while he was thousands of miles away, completely unaware of what was happening. They had witnessed violence, death, and the near loss of someone they cared about, and then had been abandoned to process it all alone. Detective, I need to see Mrs. Henderson. I need to know how she's doing. She's still in a coma at Cedar Falls General Hospital. Sarah Henderson is there with her most of the time. I'm sure she would appreciate a visit from you. As the crime scene team finished their work and began packing up their equipment, Marcus realized that his house would be uninhabitable for some time. Even after the police released it back to him, he would need professional cleaning services to deal with the aftermath of what had happened there. Tom Bradley approached as Marcus was trying to figure out his immediate housing situation. Marcus, you and your dogs can stay with me and Sarah for as long as you need. We've got a guest room and a big backyard. I can't ask you to do that, Tom. You're not asking. I'm offering. Besides, Sarah's been wanting to meet your famous dogs for years. Tom looked at Rex and Luna, who were finally stirring in the truck. They've been through hell. They need stability and quiet to recover. Detective Martinez handed Marcus her card before leaving. Sergeant, this case is closed from a criminal perspective. Kruger's death appears to be justified self-defense by Mrs. Henderson. But there's one more thing you should know. What's that? We found evidence that Kruger had been planning this for a long time. This wasn't random. He specifically targeted military families, and you weren't his first victim. We're working with other police departments to see if he's connected to other break-ins at military homes. The thought that other families might have gone through similar ordeals was disturbing, but Marcus was glad that Kruger would never be able to hurt anyone else. Mrs. Henderson, despite her age and size, had stopped a predator who could have gone on to terrorize other military families. As Marcus loaded Rex and Luna into Tom's car for the trip to the hospital, he reflected on the courage it must have taken for Mrs. Henderson to fight back against Kruger. She had been protecting not just herself but Marcus's home and his beloved dogs. In doing so, she had likely saved other families from experiencing the same violation. At the hospital, Marcus prepared himself for what might be a difficult conversation with Sarah Henderson. He needed to thank her for her mother's sacrifice, but he also needed to ask about Mrs. Henderson's prognosis. The thought of losing the woman who had been like a grandmother to him was almost too much to bear, especially knowing that she had been hurt while helping him. The hospital corridor smelled of disinfectant and floor wax, familiar scents that reminded Marcus of the field hospitals he had visited during his deployment. But this time he wasn't visiting wounded soldiers. He was visiting the woman who had saved his home and possibly his dog's lives, and who was now fighting for her own life because of her courage and loyalty. The intensive care unit at Cedar Falls General Hospital was quiet, except for the steady beeping of monitors and the soft whisper of ventilators. Marcus walked down the hallway with Rex and Luna on leashes, grateful that the hospital had made an exception to their no pets policy when they learned about the circumstances. Sarah Henderson looked up from her chair beside her mother's bed, her eyes red from crying and exhaustion. When she saw Marcus, she stood and embraced him tightly, both of them struggling with emotions they couldn't quite express. "I'm so sorry, Marcus," Sarah whispered. "I'm sorry about your house, about what Mom went through, about your dogs. This whole thing is just a nightmare." "Sarah, your mother is a hero," Marcus said firmly. "She saved my home and probably saved my dogs' lives. If she hadn't been there, if she hadn't fought back, Kruger might have killed Rex and Luna when I came home. She's the bravest person I know." They sat together beside Mrs. Henderson's bed, watching the gentle rise and fall of her chest. She looked so small and fragile, surrounded by all the medical equipment. Nothing like the vibrant, strong woman Marcus remembered. Her silver hair was spread across the pillow and her hands lay still on the white hospital blanket. "The doctors say her brain activity is improving," Sarah said quietly. "They think she might be able to hear us even if she can't respond. I've been talking to her, telling her about the investigation, about you coming home." Marcus pulled his chair closer to the bed and took Mrs. Henderson's hand in his. It felt small and cold, but he thought he detected the faintest squeeze when he spoke. "Mrs. Henderson, it's Marcus. I'm home now and Rex and Luna are here with me. They're safe because of you." His voice broke slightly. "The police told me what happened, what you did. You fought to protect my home, my dogs, and other families who might have been hurt by that man." Rex and Luna lay quietly beside the bed, as if they understood the gravity of the situation. Rex placed his head on his paws and watched Mrs. Henderson's face intently, while Luna pressed against Marcus's leg for comfort. Dr. Patricia Williams, the neurologist treating Mrs. Henderson, entered the room and smiled when she saw the dogs. "These must be the famous Rex and Luna I've been hearing about. Sarah told me they were part of what motivated her mother to fight so hard." "Doctor, how is she really doing?" Marcus asked. "Better than we initially expected. The stroke was severe, but her brain scans show improvement. The trauma she experienced was significant, but she's a fighter." Dr. Williams checked Mrs. Henderson's chart. The fact that she was able to defend herself so effectively suggests her cognitive function was intact throughout the ordeal. "That's actually a good sign for her recovery." Sarah leaned forward. "When will we know if she'll wake up?" "Recovery from a stroke-induced coma is unpredictable. It could be days, weeks, or months. But I'm cautiously optimistic. Her responses to stimuli have been getting stronger, and her brain activity shows patterns that suggest she's processing information." As if responding to the doctor's words, Mrs. Henderson's eyelids fluttered slightly. Everyone in the room held their breath, watching for any sign of consciousness. Her hand twitched in Marcus's grip, and her breathing pattern changed subtly. "Mom," Sarah whispered, leaning closer to the bed. Mrs. Henderson's eyes opened slowly, unfocused at first, then gradually seeming to take in her surroundings. When her gaze fell on Marcus, her lips moved slightly, forming words that were barely audible. Marcus, home. I'm here. Mrs. Henderson, I'm home and everything's okay now. Her eyes shifted to Rex and Luna, and for the first time since Marcus had arrived, he saw a smile cross her face. Dogs, safe. Dr. Williams quickly moved to check Mrs. Henderson's vital signs and neurological responses. This is excellent. Mrs. Henderson, can you squeeze my hand? Can you tell me your name? Over the next hour, Mrs. Henderson gradually became more alert and responsive. Her speech was slow and sometimes slurred, but her mind seemed clear. She was able to answer basic questions and showed recognition of everyone in the room. When Dr. Williams stepped out to call the rest of the medical team, Mrs. Henderson gestured for Marcus to come closer. Her voice was weak but determined. Tell me, what happened to that man? Marcus looked at Sarah, unsure how much Mrs. Henderson should know about Kruger's death, but Sarah nodded, understanding that her mother needed to know the truth. You stopped him, Mrs. Henderson. You defended yourself and fought back. He can't hurt anyone else now. Mrs. Henderson closed her eyes for a moment, processing this information. Good, he was evil, had pictures of you, of other people. Journals full of terrible plans. You don't need to think about that now, Marcus said gently. You need to focus on getting better. No. Mrs. Henderson's grip on his hand strengthened slightly. Important, he said. He had done this before. Other houses. Other military families. Police need to know. Marcus realized that Mrs. Henderson might have information that could help solve other cases. What did he tell you? Bragged about it. Said he had been living in soldiers' houses for years. Had systems, ways to pick targets. Her breathing became more labored with the effort of speaking. He was proud, like it was a game to him. Sarah pressed the call button for Dr. Williams, worried about her mother's exertion, but Mrs. Henderson wasn't finished. He kept notebooks, with addresses, deployment schedules, said military wives were easy targets because they were alone and scared. The information Mrs. Henderson was providing could be crucial for other investigations. Marcus made a mental note to share everything with Detective Martinez as soon as possible. Dr. Williams returned with several nurses and other medical staff, amazed at Mrs. Henderson's rapid improvement. This is remarkable recovery for someone who has been in a coma for over a month. But we need to be careful not to overtax her system. As the medical team conducted various tests and assessments, Marcus sat with Rex and Luna in the hospital waiting area, reflecting on everything that had happened. Mrs. Henderson's awakening felt like a miracle, but it also meant she would have to relive the trauma of her encounter with Kruger. Sarah joined him after the medical team finished their evaluations. The doctors are amazed. They say her cognitive function appears to be intact, and her physical symptoms are already improving. She might be able to go home in a few weeks if her progress continues. That's incredible news. But Sarah, I need to ask you something. Your mother mentioned that Kruger had information about other military families. The police need to know about this as soon as possible. I'll call Detective Martinez tonight. If Mom's information can help catch other predators or solve other crimes, she'll want to cooperate fully. Sarah paused. Marcus, what are you going to do about your house? I know the police released it back to you, but after everything that happened there. Marcus had been dreading this question. The house held so many good memories, but it had also been violated in the worst possible way. Rex and Luna were still terrified of it, and he wasn't sure he could ever feel safe there again. I don't know yet. I need to have it professionally cleaned and probably renovated, but even then... He looked down at his dogs, who were finally relaxing for the first time since he had found them. Rex and Luna have been through enough trauma. I won't force them to live somewhere that frightens them. Have you thought about selling it? The thought has crossed my mind. But it's the first home I've ever owned, and I bought it with the dream of building a life there. Marcus sighed. Maybe with time and some changes we could make new memories that would override the bad ones. Tom Bradley appeared in the waiting area, having come to check on them after his shift. How's Mrs. Henderson doing? She woke up, Marcus said, still hardly believing it himself. She's talking, she remembers everything, and the doctors think she's going to make a full recovery. That's the best news I've heard all week. Tom sat down beside them. Marcus, I've been thinking about your situation. My uncle owns a construction company, and he specializes in renovating properties that have been crime scenes. If you decide to keep the house, he could help you make it feel like home again. The offer was generous, but Marcus wasn't ready to make any decisions about the house yet. First, he needed to help Mrs. Henderson with her recovery. and make sure Rex and Luna were healing from their trauma. Everything else could wait. As evening fell, Marcus realized that despite everything that had gone wrong, he was surrounded by people who cared about him. Tom and his wife had opened their home to him and his dogs. Sarah was treating him like family during this difficult time, and Mrs. Henderson, despite her own suffering, was still looking out for him and thinking about how to help other people. The homecoming he had dreamed about was nothing like what he had experienced, but in some ways it had shown him things about his community and the people in his life that he might never have discovered otherwise. He was home, his dogs were safe, and the people he cared about were going to be okay. For now, that was enough. 3 weeks had passed since Mrs. Henderson woke up, and her recovery continued to amaze everyone at the hospital. She was now able to sit up, walk short distances with assistance, and her speech had returned to almost normal. More importantly, she had provided Detective Martinez with information that led to the discovery of a multi-state network of criminals who had been targeting military families. Marcus sat in the hospital's family conference room with Detective Martinez, Sarah Henderson, and FBI agent Rebecca Torres, who had been called in when the scope of Kruger's crimes became apparent. The table was covered with files, photographs, and evidence that painted a disturbing picture of organized predation. Thanks to Mrs. Henderson's information, we've connected David Kruger to at least 12 other break-ins at military homes across Texas, Oklahoma, and New Mexico, Agent Torres explained. In each case, the pattern was the same. He would target deployed service members, study their routines for months, then move into their homes while they were overseas. Detective Martinez opened one of the files. What makes this case unique is that Mrs. Henderson is the first person who fought back effectively. In the other cases, family members either weren't present or were too intimidated to resist. What happened to the other families? Marcus asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted to know the answer. Most of the break-ins went undetected until the service members returned home. Kruger would live in their houses for weeks or months, then disappear before they came back. But in 3 cases, military spouses discovered him and were threatened into silence. Agent Torres pulled out a photograph of a woman with 2 young children. Jennifer Martinez in San Antonio came home early from visiting her parents and found Kruger in her kitchen. He threatened to hurt her children if she called the police. She was too scared to report it, even after her husband returned from deployment. The thought of families living in fear because of Kruger's threats made Marcus sick. How did you find these other victims? Mrs. Henderson remembered specific details about things Kruger said, including addresses and names he mentioned. We were able to track down the other families and convince them to come forward. Detective Martinez closed the file. Your neighbor's courage didn't just stop Kruger. It gave other victims the strength to speak up. Sarah Henderson wiped tears from her eyes. Mom always said that evil can only flourish when good people do nothing. Even when she was terrified, she refused to let him win. The meeting continued for another hour as the agents explained the ongoing investigation and the charges that would have been filed against Kruger if he had survived. Marcus learned that Kruger had been part of a larger network that shared information about military deployment schedules and family routines. The investigation was now expanding to include other suspects who might still be targeting military families. After the meeting, Marcus walked with Sarah to Mrs. Henderson's room, where they found her working with a physical therapist. The elderly woman was determined to regain her full strength and independence, approaching her recovery with the same fierce determination she had shown when confronting Kruger. Marcus, Mrs. Henderson called out when she saw him. How did the meeting go? Did they catch the other criminals? They're working on it. Your information has been incredibly helpful. The FBI thinks they'll be able to shut down the entire network. Mrs. Henderson nodded with satisfaction. Good. No other family should go through what we went through. She paused in her exercises. How are Rex and Luna doing? It was a question Marcus had been dreading. Despite 3 weeks of patience and gentle encouragement, his dogs were still traumatized. They had shown some improvement. They no longer trembled constantly and had begun eating normally. But they remained fearful and anxious. More troubling, they still refused to go anywhere near his house. They're getting better slowly. Tom and Sarah Bradley have been wonderful, letting us stay with them. But the dogs are still scared, and I'm starting to think they may never feel safe in the house again. Mrs. Henderson studied his face carefully. And what about you? Do you feel safe there? Marcus realized he hadn't really examined his own feelings about returning to his house. He had been so focused on Rex and Luna's trauma that he hadn't considered his own emotional response to what had happened. "I don't know," he admitted. "Every time I think about going back there, I imagine Kruger living in my space, sleeping in my bed, going through my personal belongings. It feels violated in a way that I can't explain." "Then maybe it's time to consider starting fresh somewhere else," Mrs. Henderson said gently. "That house was supposed to be your sanctuary, your safe place to return to after deployment. If it can't be that anymore, there's no shame in finding a new sanctuary." Her words resonated with Marcus in a way he hadn't expected. He had been thinking of keeping the house as a matter of pride, of not letting Kruger's actions drive him away from his home. But Mrs. Henderson was right. Home should be a place of peace and safety, not a constant reminder of violation and trauma. That evening, Marcus sat in Tom Bradley's backyard with Rex and Luna, watching them play for the first time since he had returned from deployment. They seemed more relaxed at Tom's house, more like their old selves. It was a small sign of progress, but it made Marcus realize how much healing they all still needed to do. Tom joined him on the back porch with 2 beers. "You look like you're thinking pretty hard about something. Mrs. Henderson suggested I consider selling the house and starting over somewhere else. I think she might be right. That's a big decision." "Are you sure you're ready to give up on the place?" Marcus watched Rex chase a tennis ball across the yard, his tail wagging for the first time in weeks. "I'm not giving up. I'm choosing to prioritize what's best for me and my dogs. That house was supposed to be our home, but it can't be that anymore." "So what are you thinking? Stay in Cedar Falls or make a bigger change?" "I've been considering it. The Marines are offering me a position at a training facility in North Carolina. It would be a promotion, a chance to help train new recruits, and it would be a fresh start for all of us." Tom nodded thoughtfully. "That sounds like it could be exactly what you need. New place, new mission, new memories." Over the following days, Marcus began making concrete plans for his future. He contacted a real estate agent about selling his house and spoke with his commanding officer about the position in North Carolina. Most importantly, he had several long conversations with Mrs. Henderson about his decision. "I feel like I'm abandoning you," Marcus told her during one of his hospital visits. "You fought so hard to protect my home, and now I'm just going to sell it." Mrs. Henderson took his hand firmly. "Marcus, I didn't fight to protect a building. I fought to protect you and your dogs and your right to feel safe. If selling that house and moving somewhere new gives you that safety, then I succeeded." She paused, gathering her thoughts. "That man tried to steal your peace of mind, your sense of security. Don't let him succeed by forcing yourself to live somewhere that reminds you of his violation every day. Make a choice that gives you back your peace." The wisdom in her words was undeniable. Marcus realized that true courage wasn't about refusing to let trauma affect him. It was about making the choices that would allow him to heal and move forward. 2 days later, Marcus received an offer on his house from a young couple who wanted to renovate it completely. The sale would give him enough money to buy a new place in North Carolina and start the next chapter of his life. When he told Rex and Luna about the decision, he could swear they seemed relieved. Mrs. Henderson was scheduled to be discharged from the hospital the following week, and Sarah had arranged for her to stay in a rehabilitation facility until she could live independently again. The whole experience had brought the 2 women closer together, and Sarah had decided to move back to Cedar Falls to be nearer to her mother. As Marcus prepared for his own move, he reflected on how much his life had changed in just a few weeks. He had returned from deployment expecting a simple reunion with his dogs and a gradual readjustment to civilian life. Instead, he had faced a nightmare that tested his resilience and forced him to make difficult decisions about his future. But he had also discovered the strength of his community, the courage of an elderly woman who had become like family to him, and the healing power of making choices based on hope rather than fear. The homecoming hadn't been what he expected, but it had taught him valuable lessons about what really mattered in life. 6 months later, Marcus stood on the front porch of his new home in Jacksonville, North Carolina, watching Rex and Luna explore their spacious new backyard. The house was smaller than his previous one, but it had large windows that filled every room with natural light, and a fenced yard that backed up to a wooded area where the dogs could run and play safely. The move had been exactly what they all needed. Rex had regained his confidence and dignity, once again carrying himself with the proud bearing that had earned him his nickname. Luna had blossomed in their new environment, her playful personality returning as she discovered new places to explore and new adventures to enjoy. Most importantly, both dogs slept peacefully through the night, no longer haunted by the memories of what they had witnessed in Texas. Marcus's new position at Camp Lejeune was challenging and rewarding in ways he hadn't expected. As a training instructor for new Marine recruits, he found purpose in sharing his combat experience and helping young men and women prepare for the realities of military service. The work felt meaningful, and it allowed him to use his deployment experiences in a positive way. His phone buzzed with a text message from Sarah Henderson, who had become a regular correspondent since his move. The message contained a photo of Mrs. Henderson standing in her garden, looking healthy and strong with a huge smile on her face. The accompanying text read, "Mom wanted you to see her new flower garden. She says it's the most beautiful one she's ever grown." Marcus smiled as he typed back his response. Mrs. Henderson had made a remarkable recovery, defying her doctor's expectations and returning to independent living just 3 months after leaving the hospital. Her physical therapy had been grueling, but she had approached it with the same determination she had shown in fighting off Kruger. More importantly, Mrs. Henderson had become an advocate for military families, working with law enforcement agencies to help them understand the unique vulnerabilities faced by families during deployments. She had testified before a congressional committee about the need for better security measures and support systems for military spouses and children left behind during overseas assignments. The investigation into Kruger's criminal network had led to the arrest of 6 other individuals across 4 states. 3 military spouses who had been too frightened to come forward initially had found the courage to testify, and their testimony had been crucial in securing convictions. The network had been completely dismantled, and new protocols had been established to help protect military families from similar predators. Marcus received regular updates from Detective Martinez about the ongoing legal proceedings. The FBI had recovered journals, photographs, and detailed plans that revealed the sophisticated nature of the criminal operation. Kruger and his associates had been systematically targeting military families for over 5 years, and their crimes had affected dozens of families across the southwestern United States. The information Mrs. Henderson provided was the key to breaking the whole thing open. Detective Martinez had told Marcus during their last phone conversation. Her courage to fight back, and then her willingness to share what she remembered, probably saved dozens of other families from becoming victims. On this particular evening, Marcus was expecting a special visitor. Mrs. Henderson had surprised him by announcing that she wanted to fly to North Carolina to see his new home and meet his commanding officer. At 78 years old and still recovering from her ordeal, she had insisted on making the trip despite Sarah's concerns about her traveling alone. "I need to see for myself that Marcus and his dogs are truly happy and safe," she had told Sarah, "and I want to thank his commanding officer for giving him the opportunity to start fresh." Marcus heard a car door slam in his driveway and looked up to see Mrs. Henderson climbing out of a taxi, moving with only a slight limp that was the only remaining evidence of her stroke. Rex and Luna immediately recognized her and bounded across the yard, their tails wagging furiously as they greeted the woman who had saved their lives. "There are my brave boys," Mrs. Henderson said, kneeling down to accept their enthusiastic welcome. "You look wonderful, happy and healthy and safe." Marcus embraced her carefully, still amazed by her resilience and strength. "Mrs. Henderson, I can't believe you came all this way. How are you feeling?" "I feel like a woman who has something important to do," she said with a smile. "I needed to see this new chapter of your life with my own eyes. And I have something for you." She reached into her purse and pulled out a small wrapped package. "This is a housewarming gift, but it's also something more than that." Marcus opened the package to find a beautiful hand-carved wooden picture frame. Inside was a photograph he had never seen before. A picture of him working in his yard in Texas with Rex and Luna playing nearby. It was one of the photos that Kruger had taken while stalking him, but Mrs. Henderson had somehow transformed it into something positive. "I asked the police if I could have one of those photographs," she explained. "I know it might seem strange, but I wanted to take something that represented evil and violation and turn it into something that represents love and protection." Marcus stared at the photo, feeling a complex mix of emotions. The image that had once represented his vulnerability and Kruger's predatory behavior now represented the life he had built with his dogs, the home he had created, and the love that had motivated Mrs. Henderson to fight so hard to protect them. The frame is made from wood that came from the oak tree in your old front yard, Mrs. Henderson continued. Tom Bradley had it carved for me by a local artisan. I thought you should have something positive from that place, something that represents growth and strength rather than fear. The gift was perfect in a way that Marcus couldn't fully articulate. It acknowledged what had happened without being consumed by it, and it transformed a symbol of violation into a reminder of love, courage, and resilience. That evening, Marcus cooked dinner for Mrs. Henderson in his new kitchen, while Rex and Luna lay contentedly at their feet. As they ate, she told him about her advocacy work and the letters she had received from military families who had been helped by the changes implemented after the investigation. You know, Marcus, I've been thinking about legacy lately, she said as they cleared the dishes. I always thought my legacy would be my garden, my volunteer work at the church, maybe the meals I cooked for neighbors when they were sick. That's a pretty wonderful legacy, Marcus said. It is, but it's not complete. What happened in your house, what we went through together, that's part of my legacy too. The fact that other families are safer now because we survived what we survived, that means something important. Marcus understood what she was saying. Their shared trauma had been transformed into something larger than themselves, something that had made a real difference in the world. The experience had been terrible, but the outcome had been meaningful. Later that evening, Marcus and Mrs. Henderson sat on his front porch, watching Rex and Luna play in the yard as the sun set behind the trees. The peaceful scene was everything Marcus had dreamed of during his deployment. A safe home, happy dogs, and the company of someone who cared about him. Are you happy here? Mrs. Henderson asked. I am. For the first time since I got back from Afghanistan, I feel truly at peace. The dogs are happy, I love my new job, and I'm not looking over my shoulder anymore. Good. That's exactly what I hoped for when I encouraged you to make a fresh start. She paused, watching Luna chase a butterfly across the yard. You know, when I was fighting that man in your kitchen, I kept thinking about you coming home to find your dogs hurt or killed. That thought gave me strength I didn't know I had. Mrs. Henderson, I will never be able to thank you enough for what you did. You don't need to thank me, Marcus. We're family now in all the ways that matter. What we went through together created a bond that can't be broken by distance or time. As the stars began to appear in the clear North Carolina sky, Marcus realized that Mrs. Henderson was right. They had become family through shared adversity, and that bond was one of the most valuable things to come out of their ordeal. The next morning, as Marcus drove Mrs. Henderson to the airport for her flight back to Texas, she gave him one final piece of advice. Don't forget what you learned from all of this, she said. You learned that you can survive the unexpected, that you can make difficult decisions when you need to, and that you have people who will fight for you when you can't fight for yourself. Those are lessons that will serve you well for the rest of your life. As her plane disappeared into the clouds, Marcus felt a deep sense of gratitude for the woman who had saved not just his dogs and his home, but his future. He drove back to his house where Rex and Luna were waiting for him in the yard, and he knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, he was ready to face them with courage, wisdom, and the support of the family he had chosen and who had chosen him in return. The homecoming he had dreamed of in Afghanistan had finally happened, just not in the way he had expected. It had taken 6 months, a cross-country move, and the wisdom of an extraordinary woman, but Marcus Rodriguez was finally truly home.